Is there an agenda posted?
Yeah, there's a, well, let's see, the agenda went out to everybody beforehand, and I'll show that on the screen now as well. The main thing is the all the propositions and measures, but I'll share that up on the screen.
And Sonara, I'm doing my the most, as Becca put it, the most San Diego thing ever, and listening and doing this meeting from the beach, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
So hopefully everybody can see my screen with the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah. So we normally kick off like at 3:30 just for a little bit of social chit chat and people to get on early, and then we'll hand over here to Merrin, who's on the beach. A perfect day, perfect day for the beach, and then you can see the main program and the business. So Merrin, it's all yours.
Yes. Hang on one second. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. You look great.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm across the street from the beach. It was a little bit noisy. Well, thank you all, and thanks for coming. Thank you so much, Anne and Cody, to be here shortly. The agenda is on the screen. Thank you, everybody else, for joining as well. So let's go ahead and call to order. It's I think it's 4:01. And anybody who is going to be speaking on behalf of an elected or a candidate, go ahead and queue up for that. And we'll, and anybody who would like to speak in that capacity. And sorry, I can't see the agenda really quickly here. So that'll be our first item. Thanks, John. So can we have a motion to approve agenda?
Can I ask for it to be read?
Can you ask for something to be read?
Yeah, I can read it out, Michelle. Yeah, so we'll kick off with introduction, elected officials, candidates and guests. And then after about, 5-10 minutes or so, we'll get into the main program, which is the ballot measures and the propositions. And that'll run through till about 5:15. And then we'll just have a little bit of club business with officer reports, new business and announcements right at the end.
Thank you.
All right. So any elected officials or candidates that would like to speak?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes. Doug,
Okay.
I hear you go first. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Doug Case, and I am the Political Affairs Director for Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. And since the club last met, the Senate adjourned its session at midnight on August the 31st. It was a hectic session, an unprecedented session in many different ways. But despite that, the legislature approved some significant measures to fight COVID-19, spur economic recovery, and respond to calls for greater economic and social justice. The COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act was passed and was immediately signed by the governor, and it provides relief for tenants financially affected by COVID to keep them from being evicted until February 1st. Unfortunately, some key housing legislation and police reform bills supported by the Pro Tem simply ran out of time. But these bills will be reintroduced in the next session, which begins in December after the new members take office. And finally, because of the abbreviated session, many bills were postponed until the next session, and that included Senator Atkin's signature bill this session, which would help local communities combat sea level rise, and that'll also be reintroduced in December. So thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Do we have anybody up next?
Yeah, Merrin, I can read them out because you probably, on your phone, it's hard to read the list. So yeah, next up we have...
at least we're hearing it.
Yeah, Lawana Richmond. Yeah, Lawana, if you want to go ahead. And I think we'll give the speakers 1 minute each. We normally give Doug 2 minutes because there's lots of special reasons for that. But we'll give each of the speakers 1 minute. And you should be able to see a little clock behind me if you can see me on the screen. So Dr. Lawana Richmond, if you want to go up.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lawana Richmond, candidate for San Diego Unified School Board, District E. As many of you know, it is a city-wide race, and I'm running with a focus on accountability, transparency, and equity. Right now, we have a 3 different pandemics. We have, of course, COVID, we've got the financial crisis, we've got our social justice one. They're all intersecting and will impact and education. I'd like to, for your consideration as we get closer to Election Day, as your candidate to help move a progressive, technologically and socially informed agenda forward. My website and information I will put in the chat, and I will be having Zooms twice a week so that you can ask me any questions you want at your leisure if you're curious about my perspective on the school board. I'll also put a link to the podcast already. Thank you.
What district? What district?
It's San Diego Unified School District, and it's District E, but it's a citywide race. District E is Lincoln, Morris, and Crawford clusters, but for the general election, the election is citywide, everyone in San Diego Unified boundaries, regardless of subdistrict.
That's great. Thanks, Dr. Richmond. And then next up, we have Greg Robinson. You want to go ahead, Greg?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, John. I am Dr. Greg Robinson, and I'm a sociologist at Grossmont College. I'm currently the president of the Labor Democratic Club, and I am also running for a school board, like Dr. Richmond. And I'm actually running in a very similar area, but for a very different Board of Education. And here's the mystery about this. Why would anybody spend at least $750,000 on a race that no one knows what the heck they do? And that's what's the minimum that's probably going to be spent on this race right now. It is a struggle around the values that underlie education right now. And the county board is in the crosshairs of that struggle, whether it will be Republican values or Democratic values that do it. My opponent is a Republican who has argued the best way to deal with the Black Lives Matter movement is to put more police officers on campus. And if you know anything about research, you know that the more you put police on campus, the more you will criminalize student and particularly adolescent behavior. This is the kind of struggle that's going on, and it is one that unfortunately is going to cost a huge amount of money. So $750,000, keep that one in mind, because that's what's going on around this little no-name race that no one pays any attention to. And I'm Greg Robinson, running for District 1 for the County Board of Education. And we can win it. There's more Dems in this district than Republicans, but we've got to get out and we've got to vote. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Greg. Yeah, apologies for that. Yeah, that's
no,
good.
no. I just because Loma said doctor.
Absolutely. No. There's a lot of work goes into getting those doctorates. I know, so it should be called out. It's respected. Yes, absolutely. And then next up, I think we have a representative from Nora Vargas's team.
Oh yes. Hi everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm here on behalf of Nora Vargas, who's running for the San Diego Board of Supervisors, District 1 position. And as you know, we are running a very progressive campaign, and we could really use your help, whether that's a monetary donation from $5 to $100. Really, everything you could donate would really make a difference. We would also really appreciate you volunteering your time. So if you have time to phone bank, if you want to host a meet and greet or a fundraiser with your friends, families, colleagues, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll leave 2 links in the chat for the Zoom call. And the first one is going to be a Google form if you want to donate your time. And then the second link is going to be an ActBlue link, which is if you would like to donate a monetary donation. And thank you guys so much for your support. Appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you. And then next up, we have Rob Howard. Rob, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Rob Howard. I'm a candidate for Oceanside Mayor. And you may ask, why is the person in Oceanside at the Point Loma meeting? Well, I firmly believe Democrats throughout the county need to align and work together. I'm trying to bring more Democrats to our Oceanside City Council. Why? Currently, we have a 4-1 Republican majority, and so we need to expand that. I'm really focused on bringing our community together. We have a lot of infighting, a lot of issues, but our homelessness crisis is not going away. Our climate issues are not going away. So we're actually phone banking, lip dropping, and doing, getting out and meeting people. I wanted to invite you on October 3rd. I'll be putting some info in the chat. We're doing a fun F-U-N raiser. We have some comedians and a band, and we're just going to have some fun. It's really a thank you for our volunteers. So Rob Howard, candidate for Oceanside Mayor, and I'll put my info in the chat. Good seeing everybody.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. That's excellent. And then next up, we have Michelle. I'll ask to unmute you, and you'll get the button, I think.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, John. Michelle Krug, your regional director for Region 20. Two very quick things. One is just the continuous reminder about the census. We may have longer than this Wednesday, but right now it's ending on Wednesday. Really need help reaching out to seniors who did not get it in because it's almost all on the internet. So if you can do that, make sure seniors around you have been able to get that form in or help them with it. It's countme2020.org. And the second thing is Raul Campillo, who's in the middle of phone banking right now, is having a fundraiser through the Dems for Equality on October 2nd. So check out the Dems for Equality website or Facebook. It's on October 2nd, 5:30 p.m. We really need to get that change in District 7. Thank you.
That's great, Michelle. That was perfect timing to within the second. So that was excellent. So is there anybody else who would like, a candidate or elected official that would like to speak at the beginning of the meeting? And if not, we'll keep announcements for the end of the meeting. Okay, so there are no other hands up. Merrin, so I can hand it back to you.
Thanks so much. So we do have, I see the bikes going by me in the background. All of the information we can send out on part of the newsletter as well. If there's anything else that you would like to go in the outgoing newsletter, you can go ahead and send it to us, campaign information or anything else, volunteer opportunities, or anything of that nature. I think that we're ready for our next agenda item. Speakers, Ann and Cody, are you guys ready?
I am. I don't know if Cody is here.
I'm here.
Not yet? Oh, okay.
You are?
I believe so.
All right, welcome Ann and Cody. So for club members that are longtime club members, you guys will be familiar with Ann and Cody's review of the ballot. It's pretty entertaining, and that'll be our program agenda today. So go ahead and take it away. We do have the follow along sheet that was emailed out, and I think we have a link to that maybe in the chat also. I'm going to turn it over to Ann and Cody. Thank you guys. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having us. Ann, you want to talk a little bit about your the sheet you provided?
Yes, let's put up the sheet that was created by the League of Women Voters. I suggested that we do the propositions by category. And I thought that would make our lives a little bit more cohesive, and we could be concentrating on one particular area. And we have 4 different categories. And if you wanted to, you could download this and then just circle yes or no, or write in however you feel about the particular proposition. We actually have 11 state propositions and 1 referendum. So that's what we're dealing with, 12 from the state, and then we have 5 San Diego City measures. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Now, Cody, how do you feel about starting with Proposition 15 under the property tax and rent control category? And that asks the question, should we require commercial and industrial properties to be taxed based on market value and then dedicate the revenue to schools and communities? Take it away, Cody.
Yeah. So this is an issue that's pretty close to my professional work. I work with the Board of Equalization, and And so we have heard a lot of testimony on this particular proposition. Every year we do a slightly different, Ann and I, and it's always I think we're sort of working out the kinks on this thing. So we'll see when people ask questions what's particularly challenging. But in essence, this is a response. Prop 15 is a response to Prop 13, which dramatically, so it's kind of important to understand the way that Prop 13 functions in order to understand what it's doing and what the impact of Prop 13 has done. So okay, we're being recorded now. Is that because we started talking about sensitive stuff? So so really one of the things that happened when Prop 13 was adopted, which essentially fixes, there's a lot of sort of granular details about it, but in essence, it fixes property taxation at 1% of the value of the assessed value and at the point of sale, and then it allows it to increase by 2% annually. And it doesn't actually get reassessed until it's sold again. And there's also some exemptions from reassessment for inheritors. One of the things that Prop 13 did was it basically sent education funding off a cliff. Since public schools were funded by property taxes, it really forced deep cuts on education throughout the state. Some estimate as much as a third of education funding. And we've really spent the last 40 years in education trying to adapt to that loss of funding. So a lot of us have been talking about this for a long time. People recognized right off the bat that there were some challenges with Prop 13, but it quickly became a sort of third rail, as you've probably heard, in association with Prop 13, just because people like their property tax. They don't like property tax, basically. And but one of the central problems with Prop 13 is it's not that we suddenly don't have to spend money on all that stuff anymore. We do. We just now displace the burden of that on other forms of taxation. And so one of the things that was identified is that the major loss from Prop 13 in terms of revenue is not residential. People love it because of the residential, but the real loss in terms of revenue is on the commercial side. And so Prop 15 is an attempt to address that loophole, which is that Prop 13 is limited ultimately by people's lifespans. People die and they lose their Prop 13 benefits. And if it goes to a more than 50% heir, then it gets reassessed. But if it's split between two heirs, that's fine. If it's split between a full heir, that's fine. It doesn't get reassessed. So you can preserve your your Prop 13 tax benefit. But corporations, on the other hand, that hold commercial property, they really never have to die. They don't die and they don't actually sell it. You just have a change of ownership structure, but the actual property is still owned by that commercial entity. So this is an attempt to capture some of that income, some of that revenue from the commercial side, which really was never intended in terms of the language that Prop 13 was originally sold as. It was really to keep people in their homes. That was how Howard Jarvis's ideology and his messaging was to keep people in their homes. So anyhow, this is a measure, we can kind of get into this with questions and Ann can ask questions. It's a measure that's in general supported by, it's endorsed by the California Democratic Party. It is endorsed by Governor Newsom. It's endorsed by almost all of our Democratic legislators. It's endorsed by ACLU and League of Women Voters, and pretty much all the good people have endorsed it. But anyhow, I will. Ann, do you have some questions specifically about it?
Cody, I was just going to mention it's not just commercial property; it's industrial. And I remember back in the 1970s, I actually bought an industrial property in Kearney Mesa. And the taxes have been so incredibly low over these 40 years. And that property should be reassessed. However, it isn't valued more than $3 million. So that particular property will not be reassessed because it's valued at less than 3 million. So this is really an attempt to get at the high rollers, the corporations, to have their properties reassessed so that we can pull in as much as $11 billion a year. And of that amount, 60% will go to the community and 40% will go to our public schools, all the way up through the community colleges. Can you think of anything more to add to that, Cody?
Yeah, I would just reinforce that. I mean, Prop 98, as you pointed out, Prop 98 fixed general funds and forced 40% to go to education. So I hear people say, well, it's not guaranteed to go to education. No, it is. By law, it will go, 40% will go to education. I would also point out, as you say, there are a number of exemptions. One is any small business owning less than 3 million or property worth less than 3 million will be exempted. So it will try to cut out small businesses from being impacted. Also agricultural property is exempted, so it won't affect our agricultural production. I would say one of the major things is not just about education. One of the major arguments in favor of it is not just education, but there's really a strong argument that Prop 13 has really been distorting our property investment system in the sense that it discourages certain kinds of new development because they would get reassessed. So a lot of people are very hesitant, for example, to take a property that has like a one-story Starbucks and actually turn that into an 8-story residential structure, because that suddenly they would take their tax from 1978, which is basically nothing, and it would be then reassessed. So it actually discourages, and there's some arguments that in fact, some of our housing crisis is the result of, in fact, a direct result of Prop 13. So that's another strong argument in favor. One of the arguments, there are several arguments against, and for the sake of discussion, I'll briefly note them. Like I say, I work for the Board of Equalization. A lot of assessors are concerned about the capacity of the state of the counties to dramatically expand their assessment staffing and infrastructure and their capacity to manage that increased quantity of assessment. I'd say, I mean, that's it's going to be difficult, but at the same time, states all over the country do this on a regular basis. It's not like we didn't do this before, and lots of states don't continue to do this. And on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of additional revenue to pay for that staff. So, most of the money coming to fight this thing is from large corporations and equity firms that do not want to pay the additional taxes on their commercial property, obviously.
Okay, I think we can move on to 19. So we're moving on to Proposition 19, which changes tax assessment transfers and inheritance rules. Now, do you want to give an overview of that, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually this is sort of Prop 13 related in its own way. They tried this thing last cycle, but they didn't put any carrot in it. They just put stick. In this one, they kind of sweetened it by creating what it basically says is eligible homeowners, so 55 or older, by law can already transfer their Prop 13 benefits to a new structure, like for instance for downsizing. But the commercial the residential property industry and realtors and really want to sell more homes, so they want you to be able to do that many, many times. So I think this expands it to three additional times.
Three times.
Three, right?
Yeah.
3 times, so you can continue to sort of like, you probably wouldn't be downsizing. You would just be making money. I mean, you'd be buying and investing and actually getting that benefit, being able to transfer that benefit. There is, however, on this one, there is another side where they They eliminate the parent to child and grandparent to child exemption in cases where the child or grandchild does not use the inherited property as their principal residence. So there is a sort of loophole in this that if you don't have to live in it to receive the benefit of the Prop 13 transfer for inheritors. But in this, it would actually constrain it somewhat by you'd actually have to then live in that as your primary residence. So they tried to put a little bit in there that might derive more revenue for the state in terms of certain categories losing their Prop 13 benefits. And there's also the California Fire Response Fund, which that's where you would put any additional income into that fund, and it would go to firefighting and the fire response fund. And so, I mean, I guess that gets their firefighters on board. And I don't know who, I mean, they put some of these Christmas trees together so you'll get enough people for it that you won't get it killed.
Now, there is the third opportunity for somebody who has lost his or her home in a disaster. For one time, that tax assessment from that house could carry over into the new construction. Is there anything else on this particular proposition?
I should just say that I believe the Democratic Party has, just so that folks know, that the Democratic Party has endorsed this. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a wash. Like I say, they structured it to kind of encourage labor unions and sort of more progressives to like parts of it, even though in a certain sense, it's really driven by the realtors to try to, or and the sort of residential housing industry to get people to sell more homes. And so it's a bit of a wash. I mean, I actually don't know how I'll vote, but the state party has endorsed it.
Okay, so should we move on now to 21, which is still in that same category of property tax and rent control?
Yeah, we're hitting the big ones. We're front loading this thing.
And this one, of course, does entail rent control. So would you like to summarize that, Cody?
Sure, yeah. So those of us, I was involved in the Yes on Prop 10 sort of San Diego organizing committee. Actually, I actually think I had some, I'll put this up. I had an article, like a Medium article on Prop 10, which like has basically my arguments in favor of Prop 10, which was very similar in certain ways. And they're both sponsored by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is a kind of a complex organization that is that has funded a lot of stuff that's very progressive, but it's complex in the way they have structured their finances. So it kind of sometimes gets a bit of I don't know whether it's a good rap or a fair rap or an unfair rap, but it gets a complicated rap. Here's something I did on Prop 10 last year on Medium. But so I would say in general, this is a slight modification of Prop 10 from last year. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation, AHF, kind of learned some of their lessons that clearly, I think it lost by 59-41. It got pretty hammered. So they went back and figured out what people didn't like about it. So it's not a full repeal of Costa-Hawkins. It's an amendment of Costa-Hawkins, and it stops short of allowing cities to implement rent control without constraints. So what it does, it amends state law to allow the establishment of rent control on housing that is more than 15 years old. So there's a lot of concern about what various forms of rent control. I would call it rent stabilization, because this is not classic like post-World War II rent control where you're like giving a fixed sum. This is more rent stabilization. It's used in Europe. It's used in some places in the United States still. Some places in California still have basically second generation rent stabilization, or actually third generation, because there's vacancy control, but decontrol. But I'll explain that in a second. So what it allows on they decided they didn't want to discourage new home construction, so it has to be 15 years or older. So if you were to build something, you could imagine having a solid return on investment, and then after 15 years, you you would hopefully have recouped your costs and made your profit. It allows rent increases of up to 15%. So what vacancy decontrol is this? In the old days, like in old school rent control, you had vacancy control. So you couldn't even raise rent between tenants. You'd kick one tenant out and you couldn't raise the rent tenant to tenant. And then with rent stabilization, you couldn't raise it more than you were pegged for for inflation or whatever your measure of inflation was. You couldn't raise it beyond that. But third generation rent stabilization imposes by law, Costa-Hawkins, rent vacancy decontrol, which means when you get a new tenant, it's just, the whole thing, you can charge whatever you want. And that's called vacancy decontrol, because you're taking control of vacancy and then you're just decontrolling it. So what this does is it modifies vacancy decontrol. So it sort of reimposes a form of control on vacancy, but it is you can raise the rent up to 15% over 3 years at the start of the new tenancy, above any increase allowed by local ordinances. And so, it's similar. I should say, let me explain what it is and then explain some of the pushback on it. It also exempts from rent control individuals who own
two housings.
Yes, right. More than two homes from any new rent control policies. That's a quote. Exempts individuals who own no more than two homes from new rent control policies.
Right.
And it also reaffirms there is a clause in this California state constitution which says that you can't violate a landlord's right to fair return. So whatever law you'd have to change the constitution, because that's enshrined in the Constitution. So you can't really, you have to allow a landowner a fair return on investment. So anyhow, it's basically a modified allowance for rent stabilization is what it is. I should say too, some of the pushback on this is that California actually, Assembly Bill 1482 actually is a statewide rent stabilization. It's called the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. It does impose some elements of this. It imposes a maximum rental increase of 5% plus local inflation to a maximum of 10% on homes that are 15 years or older. This is across the state. But it also preserves vacancy decontrol. So you also can raise rents to market rate between tenants. So I would say, and then you go back to doing your 5% plus local inflation. The challenge with that state law is a lot of people at the time, which is last year, were really concerned because a 5% plus local inflation maxed at 10, you can imagine if your rent was being raised by 10% every year, the rent stabilization would be cold comfort. That's a pretty substantial increase every year. I think my old man has a couple of apartments, I think, or condominiums, or did. He has a condominium. And I asked him to calculate it. And it's like, when we look at it probably over the last 20 years, it's probably raised at 1.5% or something over, on an annual basis, 10% annual or 8%, whatever. I think the inflation is probably 3% now. 8% annual is a pretty substantial rent increase every year.
Yes. Well, the California Democratic Party is supporting this. Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any other endorsements? Do you know the other endorsements on this?
Well, the AIDS.
AHF.
Labor unions, and local housing groups.
There we go. De Leon, ACLU, CDP, Antonio Vasquez. Cool. CNA.
Okay, let's move on then to criminal justice. And we'll start with Proposition 17.
Okay.
17 to me is a really easy proposition to deal with. And why don't you bring us up to date on Proposition 17, which restores the right to vote to people convicted of felonies who are now on parole. And there are 50,000 people currently on parole. Should they be allowed to vote?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think League of Women Voters is one of the sponsors of this, right? Or have you? Certainly, they're endorsers of it. ACLU and League of Women Voters and the California Democratic Party's endorsed. I mean, honestly, this is a fairly moderate. A number of states already do this. I mean, this is a pretty moderate. This is not. You could have a sort of more aggressive measure, which would probably have some difficulty, where you had currently incarcerated individuals getting the right to vote. That would be probably a much more controversial measure. But this is parolees. So I don't imagine this is going to be a hard lift. But basically, this would give return to parolees the right to vote. So,
and people prisoners in jail do have the right to vote. And I think many members of the League of Women Voters were down registering prisoners at our jails to allow them to vote. So this is strictly for parolees.
I believe that my understanding was that imprisonment is a disqualification from voting. But
well, it's a federal or a state prison, but if it's a county jail, it's permissible.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to Proposition 20, which is still in the criminal justice arena. And this makes changes to policies related to criminal sentencing charges, prison release, and DNA collection. So this is quite a complicated proposition. How do you see it, Cody? Proposition 20.
So I can talk about the details. Do you want to talk about the details, or how, would you like me to talk about it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So this is a very, very arch conservative proposition. It's opposed by it's certainly opposed by the California Democratic Party. It's opposed by the ACLU. I don't know if you have a list there, and you seem to have a pretty good handle on the endorsement list, but it's certainly opposed by Democrats in general. It would eliminate the eligibility for parole for various classes of people. The most significant, to my mind, several things that are actually pretty egregious. It would allow a number of property crimes, like theft crimes, to be reclassified to felonies from misdemeanors, like a repeat offender who steals more than $250. I mean, it's kind of crazy. If more than 3 times, I think in a year, if you shoplift for a total of more than $250, forging checks, shoplifting, I mean, so it reclassifies a whole set of nonviolent crimes from misdemeanors into felonies. And so, you likely would see people going from a 6-month misdemeanor sentence to a 3-year felony sentence. It would also, for nonviolent crimes, including shoplifting, forging checks, and certain domestic crimes, it would allow them to collect DNA for shoplifting. I mean, it's just what on earth is going on? It's also just on a fiscal side. It would force the state to assume tens of millions of dollars of additional costs to imprison people for years on end for, small $250 plus property crimes. So
calling some of those crimes wobblers. Mm-hmm. So they could either be a misdemeanor or a felony. So
on the proposition, the question from Alan?
Okay. You have a question?
Okay, we have some comments. Could you guys look at the chat? Lawana has some comments. Can you address Lawana's comments?
It's not showing on my screen.
Okay, do you see him, Cody?
If you can just say them.
Okay, okay, Lawana, go ahead.
To roll back a lot of the prison reform measures that have passed to help lower the prison population. So it'll reverse work that people have done to try to address the pressing issue. And then if you look at the crimes that it focuses on, they're really poverty crimes. They're crimes of petty theft, and they're trying to turn it into a felony to, you know, it's almost like creating a debtor's prison, more or less. Whereas I don't know that that's how we want to treat people.
That's a good point.
Well, and I would say too, I mean, toward Lawana's point, I mean, I think you have to assume that the vast majority of people, or not, I don't know, but the vast majority, a disproportionate amount of the people that this would impact would be in communities of color. I mean, this is clearly, we have a highly racialized criminal justice system, and certainly with regard to it, turning misdemeanor property, petty property crimes into felony crimes. I mean, I haven't seen the statistics, but presumably this would heavily disproportionately impact communities of color. I mean, Lawana, is that kind of part of your point there?
Yeah, it's the, you know, when you think about our current climate and the issues that we're facing and trying to address as a society, it's in the, if this were to pass, it would send a very clear message in terms of the attitude towards police reform, because this is the exact opposite of police reform.
And I do think that these kind of propositions toward that point, I mean, these are clearly, the Republican Party uses propositions to turn out the vote. I mean, Democrats have tended to use these propositions to advance the ball. Whereas, you know, the Republicans are so out of power, their really only way of like driving turnout and getting people fired, their base fired up in races in most of the state, they're going to lose their races. But these propositions allow them to sort of like, you know, flog these like really reactionary, racist sort of sentiments and to try to get people fired up. And so I would not be surprised if they, you know, they didn't cook this up in a way as a sort of, you know, mechanism to turn out the vote from their base, you know, from their base.
I see Sonara has her hand up for a question.
What is the argument in favor of this? What argument are they making as to why they would want this?
I mean, I've seen some of the advertisements from it. I mean, it's basically like, it's your typical tough on crime sort of argument that, you know, these are, because these are sort of repeat offenders, this form of criminality, that it sort of indicates some greater form of criminality. I can try to pull up some. I honestly have not spent a lot of time analyzing what their argument is, because the stuff I've seen from them is like so knee jerk in terms of just like tough on crime messaging. But I mean, I can like, let me try to pull something up here.
Well, one of the points is that the proponents of this believe that it'll cut down on car theft. It'll certainly cut down on retail shoplifting. These are their major arguments.
Yeah, I mean, they frame it as the Keep California Safe initiative and support law enforcement initiative, protect victims of violent crime initiative. So, and there is a component, sort of, it has a glancing impact on some forms of, as I recall from a thing, it does have an impact on parole eligibility for some forms of, let me find it. I don't typically like to work off the fly on this stuff, but as I recall, it has an element on,
Well, the supporters believe that it would cut down on rapes and it would cut down on people carrying a deadly weapon and it would cut down on child rape. So these are some of the supporters who believe that this law would cut down on those types of crimes.
Yeah, it does. So it has a component that they sort of lead with, which is on the and like Luana said, this is a sort of an attack on Prop 47 in 2014.
Yeah,
and
Prop 57 and Prop 109.
47, 57, a whole series of, yeah.
Yeah.
And so some of the stuff is like it expands the list of crimes for which early release is not an option. And so the stuff I've seen is like, they're really pushing hard on the elements that are sort of the sex trafficking elements and the assault on police officers, that sort of thing. Reclassifying those as not being eligible for early release.
All right, Ruth has her hand up, and may I suggest that be the last question? Ruth, unmute yourself. Okay. Ruth, you're still muted.
Ruth?
You're still muted, Ruth. Okay, now.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay. I have in front of me the UT, and they're saying yes on Prop 20 because of those things you were talking about, 47 and 57 being very badly written. So I just thought that was interesting that the UT says yes.
Yes, I was shocked when I read that. I couldn't believe that they were for it. Okay, let's move on to 25, still in the criminal justice arena. And this too is poverty related because it's addressing the issue of bail. And it replaces cash bail with risk assessment for suspects awaiting trial. What does that mean, Cody?
Yeah, so a lot of us have been advocating for the last several years the elimination of cash bail for a lot of reasons. I mean, one obviously cash bail is highly it is highly unfair, given that a person's access to bail is not an effective way of determining their risk of flight. So or their risk of offending while they're out on bail. It just has absolutely no, it has no bearing on that. Again, it has cash bail has like really strongly, a strongly racialized component as well, given the distribution of income in our society. And honestly, what a lot of the advocates of cash bail, Monica Montgomery was doing a lot of this before she got into office, and there's a real strong coalition that's been working on this. It really is. It is. There are much more. It's not just about the injustice of cash bail, and in addition, if you look at the way in which the amount of bail is determined. That is a judge is determining that, but that's also highly biased. I mean, we can see not just from the statistics, but from a lot of social psychological work. I mean, the bias in determining bail is like, that's one individual making that assessment. Really some of the strongest arguments are not even about equity. They're about, it's just not effective. Cash bail is not an effective way of determining who should receive bail. So this is endorsed by the CDP. I don't, Anne, do you have a list of the endorsers?
It looks like it's primarily legislators. Wait a minute.
Yeah, and as Rob Howard points out, the risk assessment paradigm will be imperfect and probably racist to a significant degree as well. But
what is the issue related to risk assessment would that be a detriment in any way to passage of 25?
I'm also seeing here, Luana's pointing out that Luana, you want to talk about why the people you're working with on criminal justice don't endorse this?
So the people that I work with on criminal justice reform do not endorse this because in the same way that the setting of bail amounts can be biased and it's left to the judge, the way that this is set up, the decision about whether or not someone can be released will be dependent upon what judge they get. And that decision will be based on one person, which is the judge. And this is not to say all judges are biased, but it is to say that the risk of getting a biased judge will impact the benefits of this particular proposition. And so
I think that was the question. That was the question I was raising. How could we standardize a risk assessment so that it could not be interpreted according to a particular judge?
So in the conversations that we've had in the panels where we've talked about it, it really has been a request to look at the language in it and include something that doesn't make it have a single point of failure. And so some of the things that could be considered could be some type of independent review or just something that involves more than just one person having ultimate power.
Yes.
I mean, that was really, I mean, the idea of cash bail going away is great. And nowhere, it wasn't saying only OR, but it's saying have it be not just, whether or not the judge is having a bad day or whether or not this judge has a particular set of biases.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, just to be clear, I mean, I think that there are criticisms from, let's say from the left, in the sense that this is not adequate enough as a reform. But in terms of the sort of support for no on Prop 25, it is overwhelmingly Chambers of Commerce, Bail Agents Association, Howard Jarvis overwhelmingly conservative, and the endorsers are all CDP, California Teachers Association, SEIU, League of Women Voters,
Democratic.
Karen Bass, Newsom, Durasso, Holly Mitchell, Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, Connie Leyva, Tony Atkins. I mean, so I think that what Luana is pointing out is true, that there is a critique from the left about whether this is enough and whether or not this will preserve certain elements of the inequity. But by and large, your progressive ecosystem is supportive of this as being superior to the cash bail system.
Yeah, Michelle Krug has a hand raised as well. Michelle, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I just was going trying to combine both of them. So the ACLU was one of the major organizations that pushed this bill in the first place in the legislature. But it got so watered down that in the end, they actually opposed it in the legislature. So for me, the main issue, as Luana pointed out, is that the matrix for risk assessment is fraught with issues. And I think it's too high. I mean, not me, but legal minds that understand this better than me believe it's too high and it's not fair. But I also don't think that we want cash bail. So for me, I'm going to vote yes to get, which one is that? 25. I'm going to vote yes on it to get rid of the cash bail and strongly work in the legislature to change how the risk assessment is done.
Yes, yes. Okay, any other?
Before we move off the statewide measures, I think Ellen Nash has something she wanted to say about Prop 16.
We also have a lot more of these measures, so just FYI. Ellen?
I'm here. Hello. I'm here. Hello. I wanted to
We haven't done 16 yet, just FYI.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. Are you gonna cover it?
Yeah, Anne has a special list which is grouped by topic or by.
Okay, all right, we'll hold it for then. Thanks.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead
I'll
and do
mute
that.
myself.
Yeah, I can chime in when you get there.
Okay, so we're going to move on to healthcare. And so we'll be talking about Proposition 14. And this is a proposition that will have to have 2/3 vote to approve it. It does issue $5.5 billion in bonds for state stem cell research, for the Stem Cell Research Institute. So we're asked the question, do we want to take out $5.5 billion in bonds, which will end up paying $7.8 billion in payment back and also interest on this. So it'll be $5.5 billion for the bonds and then $2.3 billion for interest. So what are your thoughts about this, Cody?
Yeah, so Prop 14 is the whole CERM paradigm is a very interesting one. This is endorsed by the California Democratic Party, but I would say there are organizations like on the left, which are in the healthcare industry and the sort of STEM research industry that are very concerned about this. This was originally the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine was established
2004.
Yeah, I think it was Prop 71, was that it? In 2004 by Prop 71. And it's a very interesting organization. It has its own board by law, by Prop 71. It was given, I think, initially $3 billion or something.
Yes, $3 billion.
And it for stem cell, and it created this very strange board, which is made up of the chair for many, many years until just recently was this guy, Robert Klein, who also happened to be the main funder for the ballot initiative and the main funder for this ballot initiative. And he's sort of like a kingpin of the stem cell research. And it's kind of a challenging thing. It has spent a lot of money. It hasn't to date produced much of anything. It's done a lot of really great basic research, but it's had a lot of criticism on the left, also on the right, but on the left from people that are concerned about the lack of transparency, the fact that its board is made up of these like large universities and industry representatives who stand to get the grants. I mean, I think some crazy number, like I wrote it down somewhere, some very large percentage has gone to, let's see, it's at least 8 out of every $10 that the agency, quote, 8 out of every $10 that the agency has handed out have been collected by 25 institutions that have members on the board. So, you know, there's a lot of concerns about, particularly with what's happening right now, there's a lot of concerns that having an additional $5.5 billion in a general obligation bond that will be $7.8 billion by the time it's paid off. When we're already paying, I think we're paying $327 million a year to repay the $3 billion from 2004. And so we'd slap several hundred million more on top of it. So anyhow, it is endorsed by the California Democratic Party. It would be, this money would go to basic stem cell research.
However, Cody, it would only be 1.5 billion that would go to research and treatment development. The rest of it would entail what else? There would be training of physicians and students.
Overhead.
Only 1.5 billion.
So I have a question. What have they done to show for all of these years that they have performed science and research? I'm all for stem cell. I'm a scientist, engineer myself. One, what have they done? And the second, what if we don't pass this Proposition 14? What will happen to them?
Yeah, so this is one of the critiques that actually, what's it called? The Center for, Berkeley has a Center for, they came out strongly against it. It's called, let me find this, Center for Genetics and Society at Berkeley. It's a sort of progressive institute in this field. And that this was part of their critique, is that like, they haven't really returned, they projected in 2004 that they'd return up to $1 billion to the state. They've so far returned 350,000 in terms of benefits. They've achieved very little direct healthcare cost savings. I don't think they have a single, oh yeah, this is it. The quote, after spending all of the $3 billion in authorized bond money, they have not a single US Federal and Drug Administration approved product. So, I mean, it's part of the criticism with this is, number one, it hasn't produced the kind of benefits that were projected. The other part is that the STEM industry has actually changed dramatically in the intervening 15 years. So, you know, it's a $10 billion, there's $10 billion of private sector investment. The feds are investing $2 billion a year. There's also an element where a couple of the critiques point out that actually the kind of stem cell research that it has invested in, there's been a sort of move away from that kind of stem cell research, because now there's other ways of producing pluripotent cells other than the sort of your old school stem cells. So there are a lot of critiques in terms of what this has produced. To me, the biggest problem is just a governance problem. It's a very strange organization. You take public money, you create this like pretty unaccountable organization made up of the recipients, basically of the recipients of the money. And it can't be changed except by a 70% plus vote of the legislature. I mean, it's a very impregnable organization. And so there's a lot of concerns about several places point out that the general counsel of CERM said that, look, the conflicts of interest are inherent in the organization. You can't get rid of them because of the nature of the board. So anyhow, I'm sort of representing the critical side. The CDP has endorsed it, the parties endorsed it, and a lot of sort of folks have come out, but there are genuine concerns about the effectiveness of this as a public investment.
I think you've really brought everything close together, and we'll have some interesting thoughts about how to vote on this particular proposition. Let's move on to Proposition 23, and this pertains to kidney dialysis clinics. And so the proposition requires a physician to be on site at kidney dialysis clinics and consent from the state for a clinic to close. So here it's requiring that the 80,000 people who use dialysis have to decide, is it crucial to have a physician at every single clinic throughout the state? And also, how important is it to have a report of infections at all these clinics every 3 months? And how can a clinic survive if it has to pay extra for a physician? And can it close? Well, according to Prop 23, it can't close, and it can't refuse treatment to an individual who needs dialysis. So that's pretty much the proposition in a nutshell, but what more can you add, Cody?
Yeah, so I would say like the interesting thing about this proposition and last cycle's like version of this is, so the context of this is you have an industry which is, you know, it is taking advantage of a need. There is a genuine need for dialysis since diabetes is such a significant problem. But it really is sort of taking advantage of the structure of health insurance, but even more so of sort of Medicare and so it is I mean, it's like massive industry. It's just like bleeding out. It's just sucking cash, like vacuuming cash out. I mean, there's, I'm trying to see like, last year in California, they had $468 million in profits in 2018. So, I mean, they're just cleaning house. They have a client base that's essentially cannot not come in and get the dialysis performed. And it's, and it's done I mean, it's largely automated. So they just come in and they, it cycles through the blood. And they have been in a fight now with SEIU UHW for a number of years, and SEIU has been trying to unionize them. So in a way, this is an aspect of that conflict to take those massive profits that the dialysis industry is generating by having really just a very low, they've basically found a little niche in our healthcare system that allows them to just like, expropriate massive quantities of cash. And they've been fighting unionization. So presumably this, like the last cycles, is heavily, presumably SEIU is a big part of this right now. So that's kind of the background context. The CDP has definitely endorsed this. Cal Labor Fed has obviously endorsed this. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. And we're going to move on to the last 4 state propositions. And one of the most appealing ones to many of us is Proposition 16. And back in 1996, here in California, and I remember really opposing Proposition 209. I don't know how many panels I was on back in 1996 opposing Prop 209. And it was passed and it went into effect. And it says that the state cannot discriminate or grant preferential treatment based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, education, or contracting. So that's what Proposition 209 was all about. I remember when I was trying to hire people, I was told if a man and a woman are equal, of course you hire the woman. That's a given. This is part of what we should be doing. And then Prop 209 stopped that. So what does Proposition 16 do?
So we fought earlier in the year, we fought for ACA 5, which was a constitutional amendment, which would put this on the ballot. Prop 209 has really dramatically limited our ability to create some equity in our employment and education system. So, the effects of Prop 209, it's a little, in a way, this is kind of like, I always start these things by like talking, first of all, is like, affirmative action is a sectoral response to deep inequities in our society and economy. And so like, a lot of the arguments, it is obviously affirmative action is not ideal in the sense that like, it would be preferable to actually give people of all genders and all races and ethnicities equal pay, equal family wealth, equal opportunity before the law. I mean, that's the ideal. Obviously, like, yeah, give them better preschool, start from the very beginning, give everything so we actually have equal opportunity in this country. What affirmative action is basically acknowledgement that not being the case, this being a greatly unequal and inequitable country and world, that we actually, at the point of hiring and education, we try to counteract all of those inequalities. And that's, I think, the fundamental aspect. The sort of reactionary argument against affirmative action is like, no, you need to make it all equal. But what the reality is if you have, quote, like technocratic equality at the point of hiring or enrollment, what you're actually doing is saying, we're going to have, quote, equality at this moment, and therefore we're going to enshrine the inequality that exists in the system at large. And so, I think really it's essentially inconceivable that we could do anything to address the inequalities and inequities in our education system and employment without having some form of affirmative action at this point. I mean, obviously, we're organizing progressively to try to get equality at those deep levels of our society. But in the interim, I think most of us believe that affirmative action is a sectoral response to sort of correcting a modicum, a small little bit of that overall inequality. So that's what this would do, is once again, it would get rid of Prop 209, repeal it, and allow forms of affirmative action in both employment and in enrollment, university enrollment.
And would Ellen a quick chance?
Would Ellen Nash like to join the conversation?
Sure, I would. I'm actually a product of affirmative action. I wouldn't be where I am today, which after working 38 plus years in academia, I wouldn't be retired today if it wasn't for affirmative action. So I like to tell my story. Cody did a good job explaining it. However, I think my story will also reinforce the importance of it. I was a young kid in high school, bused to a pretty predominantly white school, and slated to go into, I got great grades in home economics. So my future was designated to working at Ratner's downtown, and some of you remember that place. And college was not in my plans. Counselors didn't, groom me for college. And it was 2 African-American men that came to our campus. I was attending Crawford High School in my 11th grade year, and actually changed the trajectory of my life by saying that I was college material. In my 11th grade year, yes, I had to take college prep classes. They had to really put me in incredible heavy duty tutoring program in order to ensure that I was eligible for San Diego State University. So it wasn't a gift, but I had to work hard. I had to work my ass off to get to the eligibility standards. But it was because of those individuals broadening the net in order to ensure that there were African-American kids that were eligible for San Diego State University. That's what affirmative action is. It really is a good faith effort to see where your gaps are, and in terms of a data-driven approach, in terms of the population, see where your gaps are, and you fill those gaps in by broadening the net, by ensuring. Ensuring isn't giving a person a break, but ensuring is preparation, looking at it maybe for the next 10 years, preparing individuals to go into those certain areas where we may have gaps. That's what affirmative action was about. And we were sold a bill of goods by the Proposition 209 by Governor Pete Wilson at that time and others. Remember 187, he got that piece passed, then he pulled off 209. So it was really about anti-people of color. And so not only was I just a beneficiary of it, but I actually had to implement, because I went into HR as my field, and I actually implemented affirmative action. And that, again, that's why I can speak from it, because it is a way of broadening the net to ensure that women, people of color, low wage earners, that issue is addressed by good faith efforts, by deepening access to training programs, by ensuring we have very good tutoring programs to ensure kids get into college. So it's going the extra step or the extra mile to make sure that happens, and looking at the workforce and looking at the data and saying we need to address underutilization in these areas. So for me in HR, that meant from the custodian at San Diego State all the way to the president of the university. I was involved in ensuring that those applicant pools included people of color who were well qualified, not underqualified, well qualified, but we broadened the search for a president, for a vice president. We broadened the search where we used different kinds of ways of advertising to ensure that we were able to attract, going to HBCUs. You know what I'm saying? So it's just broadening the pool to ensure we have all representation in the pool. So I was a beneficiary, but I also had the opportunity to implement affirmative action. And those were some of the positive outcomes. I served on the enrollment management committee at San Diego State under affirmative action. And again, we had to reach into schools, put together different kinds of agreements with schools to ensure that those kids were qualified and eligible. But we pushed parent engagement programs. We pushed employment preparation, school preparation programs. And we directed resources to ensure, again, that there was a gap, that we were going to fill that gap, but it was going to be based on the standards. And at San Diego State, the enrollment standards were elevated every single year. I'm sure Luana can say the same thing at UCSD. It wasn't about lowering the standards. It was about ensuring that we had applicants and students academically prepared, adequately prepared to meet the standards in order for them to be eligible to get into those high-end universities. So that's what affirmative action is about. And I think there's been a great setback. I was also implemented Prop 209. And I saw where all the efforts and all the work went away because people there was no longer the commitment, as Cody said. It's there, but it's about challenging the institution's commitment. And when Proposition 209 was voted in, that commitment went away. Period.
Thank you, Ellen.
That's where we are.
Okay, we're running a little close to having to speed things up. So let's move on unless we have any other comments about Proposition 16, the repeal of Proposition 209, yay. So let's move on to Proposition 18. And Proposition 18 would allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the election in November. If they're 17 age at time of the primary, they can vote. This would allow them to vote if they will be 18 at the general election in November. So it's just a question of, should we allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the general election to vote in the primary or a special election? What do you think, Cody?
The CDP endorses this. I think it's really not, there's very few people opposed to this. I think there's some, like on the ballot, there's some group opposed because it's like, they're so immature, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of like, get off my lawn sort of thing. But I think, this is not, we're not the first state to do this. I think there's probably close to a dozen states that have already done this. Basically just says, if you're going to be eligible for the general, you should be able to have some say in who you're going to vote for in the general. So it's pretty non-controversial.
Okay, so let's move on then to Proposition 22, which refers to app-based drivers, such as drivers of Lyft or Uber. Should they be independent contractors, or should they adhere to what we've already voted on, or has been approved, I should say, AB 5? So what is our position on that, Cody?
Yeah, so I mean, AB 5 was Assemblymember Gonzalez Fletcher's bill. It was, the Republicans immediately saw an opportunity to sort of fire up people that had gotten, it was a broad categorization, and some people got like caught up in that dragnet that were not necessarily originally intended. So far as I understand, it was intended predominantly to hit app-based driver like, Lyft and Uber and that whole new paradigm and of app-based, employees or contractors. And it's actually been amended. I mean, we got some AB5 amendments in exempting certain categories, the categories that had been sort of like, had kind of been collateral to the main effort. So I think a lot of people who formerly had issues with AB5 have sort of like muted their criticism because we've exempted a lot of those categories. And this is just basically a straight effort of the sort of Republican Party to fight back against our effort to, to correct the inequities of the app-based paradigm. And yeah, CDP endorses or opposes Prop 22. I think Ann's pulling up the page right there with the opposition and support.
Right, but it seems to me that some of these drivers do really serve as somewhat of an employee because they have to work a certain so many hours a week, and they would get some health care benefits. And they would also, if they're injured, they would have some health care benefits coming from the corporation. Is that how you see it also, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main effort with Prop 22 is basically to allow the corporation to avoid reimbursing their employees consistent with state law. I mean, they're trying to get a loophole in by classifying them as contractors, and this is trying to preserve that loophole that AB5 closed. I would say more broadly, this is sort of a governance issue. I mean, we're moving into this paradigm. We see it with short-term vacation rentals. You see it with scooters. You see it with this paradigm in which people force through changes to our way of life in sort of like gaming the law in order to create a fait accompli where it's like, you can't stop us now. We're too deep in, once you try to start regulating them and to close those loopholes, well, Lorena closed the damn loophole. And so they are going to try to roll that back and make political hay out of it. But I think as currently amended, I think, my guess is that AB5 will hold, but we'll see.
Okay, so let's move on to Proposition 24. And that expands the provisions of the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, and creates the California Privacy Protection Agency to implement and enforce the California Consumer Privacy Act. What is that all about?
Now, I'm going to admit on this one, honestly, I do not have a position on this. I sort of sat through the e-board. I sat through the e-board discussion of this, and I sort of read up on it, and there are good people on both sides of this bill. And so I'm going to have to bow out. This is the only proposition you're going to get today where I'm just like, dude, I'm not touching this. I mean, you can describe the basic parameters of it, but organizations that are typically on the same page are on opposite sides of this bill. And so I'm going to defer to you on this thing.
Okay, well, it does refer to how different corporations deal with our personal data. Now, one of the issues related to this is that a new state agency would have to be created to really monitor this. And that would probably cost $10 million a year just to make sure that we're being protected as consumers and our data, our personal data, are being protected. So right now, we already have the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that went into effect in 2018. So this is asking us to really work on this and make it more effective. Now, I know many people might have some strong feelings about this, and maybe they would like to jump in at this time. Any thoughts about Proposition 24, changes in our consumer privacy laws?
Hey, Anne and Cody, this is John. I can't raise my hand as a co-host, but I can, as I'm the man driving the sharing of the screen, I can throw up a couple of things here that are worth just reading up on. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, who normally come out pretty well on top of privacy issues to do with internet users, oppose this, and the ACLU opposes this as well. And there are a couple of good, strong arguments that they have for that. But basically, it becomes a kind of pay for privacy expansion for corporations. And when you look at the list of supporters, often just follow the money and look at the list of supporters for and against. But to Cody's point, there are people he would normally see, on the other side of the argument. Betty E, for example, supports this. So there are kind of mixed opinions, but I think a little bit of delving and talking to any tech friends you have would probably lead people to support opposing it. That's my view.
I also think one of the things that came up, that my perspective when this thing came up before the executive board, I really kind of, my thought was like, okay, we're clearly not there yet. I mean, we can get to something where Ro Khanna is on the same page as EFF and ACLU, so I just think like part of my, as I've read this over the last several weeks, I've read several articles on it. I think basically like, this is maybe something that we're not quite ready to legislate through a proposition. It seems like we probably need to have more of a public dialogue about where we're going as a society, because just the level of disagreement from people who should be on the same side to me was like a red flag that we're not there yet.
Okay, any other comments about Proposition 24? Hearing none, let's move on to the city of San Diego. And we can start right out with Measure A, which has to do with homelessness, and it's created by the San Diego Housing Federation. And this is asking us to increase our property taxes to support $900 million in bonds to create housing for extremely low income, very low income, and low income people in our community. So this is a bond issue. It will require 2/3 of the vote to make it pass. And what are your thoughts about encumbering homeowners, property owners, by increasing their tax assessment by as little as $3.14 per 100,000 value of that property? And it could go up to $20.85. I believe that's the number.
Yeah, so I mean, this is split 3 ways between the chronic homeless, low-income vets, seniors, disabled, and young people aging out of foster care, and then 1/3 for low-income families. It's a general obligation bond, $900 million. It's not perfect. There are some details about implementation that some folks I know are not that happy about, but the San Diego County Democratic Party endorsed it. I've certainly supported it since 2 years ago, before it even got on, before it was even a measure. You can pour a lot of money into this problem and it still will not come anywhere close to solving it. But I think this is a step in the right direction.
Well, they do give us some numbers, and it would impact us on 200,000. Okay, any other comments about Measure A? Okay, let's move on to measure B. And B, to me, is one of the most fascinating of all of our measures and propositions. And this is the creation of the Independent Commission on Police Practices. And it would dissolve the Community Review Board on Police Practices. And it would require that the city council identify and appoint members to this independent commission. Currently, the mayor appoints people to the Community Review Board, and this would turn it over to the city council. So what are your thoughts about measure B, Cody?
Yeah, it's endorsed by the San Diego County Democratic Party. A lot of people we've had ongoing concerns about the autonomy and the ability of the CRB to actually have teeth and to have subpoena power and to genuinely hold law enforcement accountable. So I think yeah, I in terms of the sort of more, I would sort of invite yeah. I think, I mean, this is one of those ones where, you know, in general, my level of dissatisfaction with the Community Review Board and its inability to actually hold law enforcement accountable drives my support for this, and I think drove the San Diego County Democratic Party's support for this. But I'd be interested in hearing from folks in the audience who are working on this issue.
Well, several of us were involved with the San Diegans for Justice. And I think one of the key issues is that it would employ at least, I believe, 7 full-time positions would be opened up. And it could have as many as 12 people on this commission.
We've got Doug Case has his hand raised. Doug, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, as somebody who is on the current CRB, I support the creation of the commission. It would give the board much greater authority, but have the duty to do an independent investigation of officer-involved shootings, in custody deaths, and give it the discretion with subpoena power to investigate other cases. It would provide independence, so we're no longer accountable to the mayor's office, and we would hire our own executive director rather than have that person appointed by the mayor. And we would have our own independent attorney as opposed to being represented by the city attorney's office. And so I think it gives a lot more teeth to police oversight in San Diego, and would encourage people to vote for it.
Oh, that was perfect, Doug.
A pretty strong endorsement.
Okay, any other comments about measure B? Let's move on then to measure C, and we're going to talk about the San Diego Unified School District. And should we have district-only elections for the general election? Or should we continue to have district-only elections like we have in the primary? And I'm sure we have some experts here who could voice their opinions on this also. What do you think, Doug? What do you think, Cody?
So I was sat on some of the sort of the school board or the school district held a couple of these sort of listening occasions, and I sat through several of those. You know, this sort of district primary followed by a general election is kind of problematic. This is probably an issue that's time has come. It will actually probably have some consequences. Honestly, like this is one of those issues where you have, like, at the sheer level of calculation, it is probably better for like a pro-public progressive school board will probably lose a vote through this, honestly. Just because we have such a strong majority for public schools, and we could potentially lose a vote on the school board because of this. But at the same time, it's probably, in terms of, you know, representation, almost all of our communities have already moved toward district primary and district general, and you know, probably in terms of representation, this is an idea that time has come. So even though it's not necessarily politically expedient, it's probably right, which is in large part why the San Diego County Democratic Party endorsed it.
Okay, any other comments? Maybe LaWanda would like to say something. LaWanda?
Well, yeah, sure. I'll start by saying the right thing is rarely politically expedient. And I'll say, you know, bias as a candidate, having to reach more voters than some congressional districts hold is a huge challenge, because usually someone who's running for school board is your less experienced, less well-financed candidate, unless they have the backing of a union or some other special interest group that's going to fund their campaign. So I think, you know, when you consider that school board candidates can't accept PAC money or anything other than individual contributions, making it a more realistic pool of people to do outreach to makes it more attainable. The other part of that is, at some point we have to trust.
Do you want to jump on my?
To make decisions as individuals that are going to be for the good of the whole. And even if you stop having these 5-0 votes on the board on every single issue, you may actually gain different perspectives and voices that lead to better outcomes overall.
Wonderful.
Yeah, could I say something here?
Yeah, John.
Yeah, as the coordinator of the 1988 district elections campaign for the city of San Diego, which turned us around from all Republican almost to a Democratic city, I strongly support this. And I think Cody and Luana have detailed the reasons for it. It's something that should happen. I'm glad they are doing it. I would encourage everybody to vote for it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Measure D, and this also pertains to the San Diego Unified School District. And it pertains to the Board of Education. What this is asking us to do is make amendments to our city charter to provide procedures for filling vacancies, removal for cause, and succession to office for members of the San Diego Unified School District Board of Education. Okay, Cody, do you want to describe this one?
Yeah, this is also very simple. I mean, you know, basically this is just an application of Article 16, which already applies to city council members, mayor, city attorney, but for reasons that were probably not intended, it does not, since the school district is technically an independent district, it did not apply. So some of the things that have happened over the last year probably made people think a little bit more deeply about this problem. Yes. Where without Article 16 applying to school districts, you can imagine we could get in a situation where there was just no way to rid ourselves of somebody who had clearly violated the law or was in dereliction of their duties. So anyhow, this is another kind of no-brainer, you know.
Luana has her hand up.
Well, I think Cody did a really good job of covering it. I was just going to add that when I was the staff advisor to the UC Board of Regents, we faced very similar circumstances and had to do a bylaw amendment in order to be able to remove a board member who had just based on cause. And Cody's right. It's a no-brainer. And unfortunately, we are no longer in the day of people falling on their sword when it's become public knowledge that they've done something inappropriate. We have people who will instead continue to show up and hold on to a position because there's nothing that can stop them.
Yeah, and I think that Luana's point, I mean, it's dead on. That it's just a reality. I mean, it's hard now to imagine there was a time when a person would do something, would actually like resign, like without having to, but we're beyond that now. People are just calculating, look, this will blow over. I can either resign now in shame, or I'll wait 6 months and it'll all blow over and I can get through this damn thing. And so as a community, you know, at a certain point, we're going to have to anticipate those sorts of situations.
Okay, we're going to move on to our last measure, and it's Measure E. And this pertains to the 30-foot limit in the Midway Pacific Highway community area. And so the issue is, do we want to lift this 30-foot coastal zone height, or do we want to have it remain as is? Now that area includes the sports arena, and I believe it has maybe 1,200 square acres in this area.
It's 48 acres. It's very small.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I read 1,200 acres.
Maybe. I had thought it was much smaller than that. Let me double check.
Well,
yeah, the Measure E is for the entire Midway area. It is not just for the sports arena redevelopment.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, it does include more than 1,200 acres, and 444 acres of that is privately owned. The rest is owned by the city.
So we had a huge fight. We had a huge fight on this in Central Committee at Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has endorsed this measure, but it was super shady. I mean, it was supposed to just be an informational item, and they exploited some loophole to actually have a vote on it in spite of it just being an informational item. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. So, you know, I think for me, the challenge with this, having seen this game multiple times now, I mean, unfortunately, it's just a really recurrent problem, is this thing where we give like windfalls to developers, and then we later try to claw back public benefit. And so I'm not inherently, this is like, frankly, this is not the sort of, this may not be the prime coastal like view stuff that's conceived of with the coastal height limit, but at the same time, to give developers this huge windfall without requiring some sort of public benefit, without requiring any affordability requirements, nothing, it's just an insane, we are a public, we should get something in return for value that we create. If we're creating billions of dollars of value by getting rid of this height limit and creating a precedent for getting rid of the height limit, let's just point that out as well, then really we shouldn't do it without at the same time getting some public benefit. So yeah, I mean, I think I am against, but the party voted to endorse it. And frankly, it's one of those moments where you sometimes have a Central Committee where you're like, damn, I'm gonna quit this thing. This is crazy. Like literally, it's like developers speaking to committee, Chamber of Commerce reps speaking to Central Committee, and the Central Committee members like kind of just like, oh, okay. Even though you have like brutal fights and you tell everybody the details, and you still sometimes get these votes where you're just like shaking your head. But anyhow, this happened. What I'll say finally, and I'll let some other people speak. We had this same issue, a very similar issue with getting rid of the parking requirements downtown. And a lot of us said, look, we're not in principle against getting rid of parking requirements downtown, but that is a $90,000 per unit like giveaway to developers, and we're not going to do it. And while you have the inclusionary housing policy right here is going to come 2 weeks from now. You have to make a grand compromise where you're literally like, we'll give you this, but you're going to have to agree to 15% inclusionary housing, 20% inclusionary housing. Instead, they gave away the parking requirement, and then 2 weeks later tried to claw it back with the inclusionary, and they slit our throats on the inclusionary. So to me, it's like, no, we're not going to give you, we're not going to get rid of the coastal height limit and let you build to the sky. and get nothing in return because you promised to pay us $1 tomorrow for a hamburger today. It's not happening. So anyhow.
Okay, any other comments about Measure E?
Yes, I had some.
Good. Take it away, Doug.
And I was not at the Central Committee meeting, so I don't endorse the parliamentary maneuvers, but I do support Measure E. It is endorsed by the people in the community. The community planning group endorsed it unanimously. As Cody mentioned, it's not an area where you have any coastal views or whatever, and it doesn't really set a precedent because in order to remove other areas from the 30-foot height limit in the future, you have to go back to the voters, and the voters are not going to approve it if it's in a prime area. And so you're talking about an area that needs is very dilapidated and needs to be revitalized, and this will give them the opportunity of doing so. And so I would encourage people to vote for it.
I would like to speak up against the lifting of the 30-foot rule in Midway. My name is Mandy Hoblich. I'm a member of the Peninsula Community Planning Board. And I think that this is the start of a slippery slope that will erode the protections of the 30-foot rule that has protected the coastal region from overdevelopment. Additionally, by lifting the 30-foot height restriction, you would be restricting access to the beach by allowing unchecked development west of I-5 at a crucial intersection hub where the I-8 and the I-5 intersect. By adding over 20,000 residents to an area that is already experiencing heavy traffic problems to and from the coastal region, this development will further keep, delay, and discourage Californians from access to the coastal areas. Finally, the city has not given any guarantees that much needed infrastructure upgrades that will be required for any development will be completed before or after that completion of this development. And I am questioning the ethics of our council member and our mayor that during a pandemic are pushing for a major development west of I-5 and also for her allowing Airbnb to thrive illegally in our community are those highest priorities. And so I would like everyone to educate yourself on this. There's a group called Save Our Access that is against this measure. And while Doug, you do state that the community asked for this, I would go further and question the validity of those votes with Midway because the majority, if not all of those members, are business owners and would directly monetize off of this development. So there has been very little information provided. The developer that was awarded the RFP did make a note that if Measure E does not pass, they would not even be able to complete their RFP with the money or that they intended to make on this type of investment. And as those concerns to our infrastructure and to our existing traffic issues and lack of improved infrastructure, I would like to give Peninsula community members the opportunity to create a letter of inputs to be sent to the city. That meeting will be held for the Traffic and Transportation Subcommittee of the Peninsula Community Planning Board on October 13th at 6 p.m. You can get the information and sign up for the pre-registration by going to the pcpb.net address, web address. But I would like to, again, ask people to really look at this. This is nothing but a gift to developers. There's no requirement for affordable housing, and I am tired of the city busting through NEQA, CEQA, and all sorts of rules to profit off of our city infrastructure and continue to favor developers. It is criminal, I feel. And you guys use this narrative that it's for affordable housing, and that is not true. So
thank you, Andy.
That is my position. I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Well, thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I This is Susan. I actually also I don't trust any of the planners or the developers. There is still no plan. There's no plan to have a connection between the Old Town trolley stop and the airport, and that's been something that we've been asking for forever. And that there should have been a transit plan and an overall plan done first. Transit takes much longer than building buildings.
Good point, Susan. Anyone else? Hearing no more comments or questions, I just want to thank you all for being a part of this discussion. I especially want to thank Cody, Lavana, and Ellen Nash for their comments. John Hartley too, and I forgot Doug Chase. Anyway, thank you all. And I'm going to turn this back over to Maren.
Hey, Anne, thanks for that. This is John, not Maren, but I think Maren had to drop off just now because she had a hard deadline. And so we've run a little bit over, obviously, today on the timing. But we can just wrap up very briefly. I think if Angela's there, I'll just call on Angela because I think Angela had some information she wanted to just convey on the forward vote, which we also put in the link for the meeting. Angela, if you want to, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
So there's an organization called Vote Forward, which is where people can get an account and then they can write letters to infrequent voters. They have a massive effort where they're trying to get out 10 million letters that will be mailed on October 17th to infrequent and underrepresented voters who are also infrequent voters. Just a huge effort. They have done research where they do believe that this does encourage people to vote. So if you have time and you're willing to try it, I highly recommend it. I'm working on 100 letters at this point, but it's a massive effort across the country. And I think they've gotten up to 6 million letters that have been completed, but they are hoping for 10 million. So if you've got some time, it's worth it to see if we can get out the vote across the country.
That's great. Thanks, Angela. And they moved up the date, right? They moved the date in because of the issues with the Postal Service.
Yeah,
so.
Originally the mail date was October 27th and it's now October 17th.
Yep, that's great.
Did you post that, John? Or I know we sent it out in an email that we did earlier.
Yeah, it's in the notice to sorry, Angela. Yeah, it's in the notice to this meeting. If you go to the website, there's just one big banner at the top for this meeting, and in there is the link for Vote Forward. That'll take you to the website, or just Google. Just go ahead and Google Vote Forward, or rather use DuckDuckGo to search for Go Forward, and it'll come up. That's great. And then, yeah, next up we have Sonara, if you want to go next.
Aha, unmuted. Okay. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to let you know that two things. First of all, I've joined the Biden campaign as a volunteer organizer here in San Diego. And aside from all the phone banks that people are doing, aside from the texting, all those great stuff that is on the Facebook group, San Diego for Joe and Kamala, we're going to be having a car caravan just planned for October 10th, Saturday, October 10th, and we're going to do the entire county starting from San Ysidro up to Oceanside, back down the 15 and over to La Mesa. So we're going to start in the morning of Saturday, the 10th at San Ysidro, and then this will take all day to caravan around the county to show our support for Joe Biden in all the places. So I'm really excited about that. The other thing is I'm doing something this year that I've done in past years, but I think this year is going to be more important than ever. It's called politicalpropaganda.org. So basically what I'm doing is I'm compiling all of the political flyers that people receive in their mail and dropped at their door, so we can see what messages campaigns are sending out to voters. Because you may not get the same information as your neighbor, and there will be deceitful mailers, There will be fraudulent mailers, there will be offensive mailers, and we want to make sure that all the voters can see all the messages that are going out. So if you could just save those flyers that you get either in the mail or at your door, I would really, really, really appreciate it. I'm going to publish them online. I will either pick them up from you, or you can take a photo front and back, legible, readable, and send it to info@politicalpropaganda.org. There's going to be some interesting messaging this election. So, please save those for me. And also let me know if you want to get involved with the Biden campaign and helping us organize this car caravan rally that we're doing on October 10th. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Sonara. And so, yeah, anybody who's interested in Biden paraphernalia or getting involved in the Biden campaign and reaching out to other states, Sonara's the person. And if you don't have her contact details, just message the club and we'll get you connected. So next up, we have Michelle. If you want to go next.
Hi. I just wanted to let people know that Unite Here, the hotel workers union, is actually hiring people to walk and do regular precinct walking, of course, socially distanced and with proper protective gear in Arizona. Lots of us had talked about going to Arizona to help with this election. Obviously the world has changed, but Unite Here is paying people an hourly wage, as well as putting them up in a hotel, providing food, and from now through the election. So let me know if anyone is interested and I'll connect you.
That's great. Thanks, Michelle. And then John Hartley, you're next. Yeah. So John, you're on mute. If you can unmute.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to give you a quick update on the Clean Elections campaign. We've been working on this for a long time. Clean elections, public funding elections, levels the playing field, more regular people get elected, more people of color in Arizona and Maine, which have had clean elections for 20 years. Well, a year ago, we realized that we couldn't do an initiative drive. We just didn't have the ability. So we switched our strategy to lobbying the city council. And we did pretty well. As you might know, we got to the Rules Committee. You need 3 out of 5 votes to get to the City Council. The City Council can't put items on the ballot. We got 3 out of 5 and then 4 out of 5 at the Rules Committee. When we got to the City Council, we hit the stone wall. We got 4 votes, all Democrats, 3 women of color, and Chris Ward. We got Georgette Gomez, Monica Montgomery, Vivian Marino, and Chris fought for us and voted for us. 2 Democrats voted against us, Barbara Bree and Jen Campbell. Jen Campbell actually attacked us. We still don't understand. Both of these were supportive, very supportive early on the year. So it was kind of a shock. Right now, we're trying to figure out our next step. I have been contacted by somebody from Common Cause that suggests we go again in 2 years. So right now we're trying to get more Democrats elected. With District 5 and District 7, we have a chance to get 2 more Democrats on the city council. So that's what we're working on now. And I appreciate your support, the club's support. We have the endorsement of 7 Democratic clubs, including this club, plus 27 town councils. But because of the pandemic, it's hard to organize like we used to be able to do. Anyway, that's a quick update. Thanks everybody for your support.
That's great. Thanks, John. And then is there anybody else? Oh, I see Michelle, you have your hand raised back up.
Yes, sorry, I totally forgot. The presidential debates are coming up. So the San Diego Democratic Club, San Diego Democrats for Equality. Sorry, that was 20 years ago, the name. And the county party are going to be hosting Zooms for the upcoming presidential and vice presidential debates. So I'm pretty sure it's at 5 p.m. September 29th, which is this Tuesday. for the first presidential debate. October 7th is the vice presidential debate, and October 15th and October 22nd are the last two presidential debates. So check the club's website or the county party website. I will try to get the direct information to John to get out to the club, but put that on your calendar, September 29th, October 7th, October 15th, and October 22nd. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And so I think, yeah, I don't see any other hands raised. So
I can't raise my hand.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Susan.
I just want to, I've put it in the chat numerous times, but people don't often read the chat. I have Barbara Bree signs in the back of my car. If you would like one, just let me know. You can text me or call me 619-225-9236. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. And in fact, yeah, Luana Richmond. Yeah, I see your hands raised. If you want to go next.
I just wanted to say that there are a couple of things coming up. The school board panel at PolitiFest, another candidate forum on October 8th being hosted by the NAACP and moderated by the League of Women Voters. And I have yard signs if anyone wants them. And a link for anybody that wants to see recordings of past forums, because I really believe that if you listen, you'll see why it's really important for me to win this race. Thank you.
That's great. No, thank you, Luana. Yeah, so I think we're just 6 o'clock here, so we'll just wrap up. So there's a lot of information in today's meeting, and so we'll try and get notes out from the meeting straight away. And also, if you go to the website for today's meeting, you'll be able to see a lot of the information that we spoke about. And most importantly, of course, between now and October the 5th is when the mail ballots will start to arrive to all our neighbors and friends. And so it's important that we can convey some of the information we learned here today to them. And also, if you have time to volunteer and get involved, the local party, if you go to the sddemocrats.org for the San Diego County Democratic Party, you can volunteer there, or just contact the club and we'll get you involved. Go Team this year is a little different in that we're not obviously doing any physical contact with voters, but if you're interested in either doing literature drops where you walk door to door and hand off door hangers, and or get involved in texting and calling. So any of those, if you're interested, just shoot an email to the club, just info@pointlomadem.org, and we'll hook you up with the right people. So with that, unless I see any other hands raised, we can call it for tonight. And once again, a big thank you to our presenters and everybody for taking part and for all the great questions and for the fact that everybody thinks like I do that Measure E, we should all vote no. Okay, and with that, okay, thanks everybody, and we'll leave it there. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks.